President Trump's big, beautiful bill and your money. What now? Hello, member Super Savers and Bond Course fans. I hope you're healthy and well, and happy 4th of July weekend. As some of you already know, I am currently in Taiwan for a few weeks, as some of our kids are involved in teaching a STEM and language program in Taipei this summer, hence the notebook case background. For those of you who follow your financial journey, Caitlin and Ava will be doing a multi-part series on Taiwan and their economy and markets in the coming weeks. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. But back to our own country and our own economy and markets for the time being. So Republicans in Congress did yesterday what many thought nearly impossible. They sent the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, also known as OBBBA, or the Big Beautiful Bill for short, to President Trump, ready for his signature right before their self-imposed deadline of July 4th. And all this in a shortened trading week that saw Treasury yields up again at close of market. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ Composite hit new record highs for the year, with the Dow Industrials not far away on just released U.S. payroll numbers that surpassed expectations. So, with that in mind, here are the 3 topics that we'll be covering in today's video. 1. Who wins in President Trump's big, beautiful bill? 2. Which Treasury yields rose and which ones fell this past week? And even more importantly, why? 3. What are the yield expectations for the upcoming week's Treasury auctions? As usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. Who wins in President Trump's big, beautiful bill? Let's take a look at what's in the final version of the big, beautiful bill that Congress passed. Like previous budget bills, there was a lot of drama and back and forth negotiations in the past few weeks, so it can be easy to lose the overview of what's in and what's out. To refresh our memories, let's start with the version of the bill that the House sent to Congress at the end of May. This previous version would have increased our national debt by $3.1 trillion over 10 years, with the lion's share of the deficit increase from making President Trump's 2017 tax cuts permanent. Check out our May budget update video linked below in the first pinned comment for more details. The final version of the big, beautiful bill that the House passed on Friday is basically unchanged in its overall direction, and the centerpiece of the budget remains making the 2017 tax cuts permanent, or in other words, avoiding an automatic tax increase on January 1st. That said, the additional provisions that the Senate has added in its version mean that the deficit is expected to increase even more over the next 10 years. Instead of by $3.1 trillion, the national debt could now increase by $4.1 trillion over the next 10 years, as the Nonpartisan Committee for Responsible Federal Budget reports. And while the Senate has tinkered with a lot of the details of the big, beautiful bill, it's just 5 of its changes that, taken together, are responsible for almost $800 billion of the extra deficit. Here's a breakdown of the 5 changes from the Senate. In this column, we have a description of the changes. And in this column, we show the Senate deficit increase versus the House version in billions of dollars. The top 2 provisions, and also the most expensive on the list, try to strengthen our industrial basis by making permanent 2 tax incentives. First, reviving 100% bonus depreciation for domestic investment in equipment and machinery for $326 billion. And second, reviving domestic research and experimentation expensing for $118 billion. Third on the list, loosening the House's proposed stricter rules for SNAP work requirements and matching state funding. Softening food stamp restrictions will cost federal taxpayers a combined total of $117 billion more over the next 10 years. Fourth on the list, extending and expanding the standard deduction hike for $117 billion. The standard deduction is a tax break that every taxpayer gets automatically, regardless of income. Essentially, a fixed amount is deducted in everyone's tax return, which often produces the proportionally largest savings for low and mid-income earners. The Senate wanted to be more generous here than the House and make the higher deduction permanent. And coming in at number 5 is the scrapping of the infamous foreign corporate retaliation tax. And while this is expected to increase our deficit by $116 billion over the next 10 years, it may be the one measure that will find almost universal approval. Also labeled as the revenge tax, the foreign corporate retaliation tax would have allowed the Trump administration to impose extra levies on businesses and individuals from countries that it deemed to impose unfair or discriminatory taxes on U.S. companies. So where does this leave us, right? Well, as so often in life, it's not black and white. On the positive side, the big, beautiful bill will give the economy some much-needed clarity, and we might even start our next fiscal year with a proper budget for the first time since 1996. And regardless of whether you like the provisions or not, at least households and companies now know what's coming. There will be no nail-biting debt ceiling crisis next month, and hopefully making the tax cuts and incentives for domestic investments permanent will support further economic growth, which appears to be the main goal of the Trump administration, by the way, as Treasury Secretary Bessent has openly discussed on many occasions. The plan, or hope, is that the big, beautiful bill, coupled with tariffs and other policies, will help the economy grow out of our current debt crisis, so to speak, as we also discussed in this recent video, linked below in the first pinned comment. The passage of the big, beautiful bill will also increase the debt ceiling by another $5 trillion, which means that we should not see a government shutdown this summer. More on this shortly. That said, given our current budget deficit of almost $1.9 trillion per year, according to the CBO's, the Congressional Budget Office's estimates, even the additional $5 trillion in allowable debt may only last our government for about 2.5 years. Which leads us to the bad news. Under the bill as written, the national debt would rise from 100% of the economy today to 127% by 2034. So we still haven't solved our ongoing debt issue and continue to have a lot of homework to do before the federal deficit can be stabilized, not even to mention a balanced budget. Now, because it was a short trading day and week ahead of July 4th, markets were already closed when the big, beautiful bill was passed by the House. So we'll see on Monday what the reaction will be when markets open again. In the meantime, let's move on to the next section of today's video and talk about the treasuries that many of us own in our portfolio. Which treasury yields rose and which ones fell this past week? Here's our usual table with treasury yields from this past Friday versus the previous week. Here we have all the maturities that the Treasury issues at auction. Here's where yields stood this past Friday, and here's where yields stood at the end of the previous week. And here's the increase in rates over the past week. The 1.5 month was unchanged for the week, while all the other maturities were up, driven primarily by optimism from recent jobs data, as we discussed towards the beginning of this video. According to the CME Fed Watch tool, the market expectation at the time of this taping is that there's an almost 95% probability that the Fed will keep rates steady at between 4.25% and 4.5% at the next FOMC meeting later this month. The biggest jump up can be seen in the 1 month, which increased by 16 basis points in just 1 week, an earthquake move for what is typically an otherwise relatively stable maturity. This does bring the 1 month almost back to its normal range. It seems jittery investors who may have been parking their cash in the very short end are now a bit less jittery as geopolitical issues, tariff talks, and the big beautiful bill have been making some progress in more or less positive directions. Now, for those of you who've been picking up higher than normal yields like these ones here on the 6 to 8 week T-bills, what we refer to as blip yields here at Diamond NestEgg for treasuries that were maturing close to the debt ceiling deadline, it's likely that those blip yields will be gone by the time the market opens again after Independence Day, now that the big beautiful bill has essentially put this round of debt ceiling concerns to rest. But stay tuned as always. If we see more blip yields, you will be the first to know on this channel. Now, let's take a look at Treasury yields from this past Friday versus the beginning of the year. This row shows where rates ended this past Friday. This row shows where rates were on January 2nd of this year. And this row shows the increase or decrease in rates in 2025 so far. Again, increases in rates are shown in black and decreases in rates are shown in red. The 1.5 month through the 6 month, as well as the very long dated 20-year and 30-year T-bonds continue to be up again for the year so far, although the 20-year is only up by 1 basis point. So let's see if it will be able to hang on to this in the coming week. The 1 month and the maturities between 1 year and 10 years are still down since the beginning of 2025, with the biggest drops to be seen in the 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, and 7-year. You can find more details on these rates for any day of the week that the bond market is open on the Treasury's daily Treasury par yield curve rates page. All sources are linked below in the first pinned comment. Keep in mind that this overview gives you a general feeling for where rates currently stand along the maturity spectrum. The yields that you may get when you buy at a specific auction or from a specific broker, or when you sell, will likely differ a little bit from what's shown here. So, now that we know where Treasury yields ended the week, let's move on to the next Treasury auctions. What are the yield expectations for the upcoming week's Treasury auctions? If we go to Treasury Direct's upcoming auctions page, we can see that all the weekly T-bill auctions are happening as usual. The 52-week T-bill is also on the auction schedule. And if we scroll down, we can see that the 3-year T-note, the 10-year T-note, and the 30-year T-bond will also be auctioned off next week. The 10-year T-note and the 30-year T-bond are reopening auctions, so we already know the coupons on those. At the time of this taping on Fidelity's platform, here's where the expected yields stand for the T-bills that have been announced already. Here's the coupon and the expected yield for the 3-year T-note. Here's the coupon and the expected yield for the 10-year T-note. And here's the coupon and the expected yield on the 30-year T-bond. Please keep in mind that all of these numbers can and usually do change all the way up to the time of the auction. All right, members, super savers, and bond course fans, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned something new. And for those of you who subscribe to Your Financial Journey, check out this latest video here from Ava on what it means to be middle class in America and how you can make your dollars stretch just a little bit further, because that middle class number has skyrocketed more than many can imagine in recent years. And as always, if you want to learn more about bond investing and building out a bond portfolio while rates are still attractive, then check out this video here on our bond courses, because rates haven't been at these levels on average in decades. I've also linked all the details on our bond courses and our YouTube Super Saver membership below this video for your convenience. Once more, happy July 4th, and I'll see you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.